Have you ever wondered how the world got carved up by European powers? It sounds like something out of a fantasy novel, a king drawing a line on a map and saying, "This half is mine, and that half is yours." But that's almost exactly what happened in the late 15th century, thanks to a document called the Treaty of Tordesillas. This isn't just some dusty old piece of paper. It's a story of ambition, exploration, rivalry, and a decision that would shape the destiny of millions and redraw the map of the world. So let's set the scene. It's the late 1400s, the heart of the Age of Discovery. Two Iberian neighbors, Portugal and Spain, are the superstars of maritime exploration. They have the best ships, the bravest sailors, and a burning desire to find new trade routes to the lucrative spice markets of Asia. Portugal had been at it for a while, methodically exploring the coast of Africa under the guidance of figures like Prince Henry the Navigator. They were building a trading empire, setting up forts, and getting closer and closer to rounding Africa to reach the Indian Ocean. Spain, on the other hand, was a bit late to the party. They'd just finished the Reconquista, uniting their kingdom under Queen Isabella IV of Castile and King Ferdinand II of Aragon. They were itching to catch up to their Portuguese rivals. And then, a determined Italian mariner named Christopher Columbus walked into their court with a radical idea. He proposed that instead of sailing east around Africa, they could reach the East Indies by sailing west across the Atlantic. Everyone knew the world was round, but most thought the ocean was just too vast. Columbus, however, had miscalculated the Earth's size, thinking it was much smaller. Isabella and Ferdinand, fresh off their victory and looking for a competitive edge, decided to roll the dice. They funded Columbus's voyage, and in 1492, as we all know, he didn't land in Asia. He stumbled upon a new world, the Americas, though he would go to his grave believing he'd reached the outskirts of Asia. When Columbus returned to Spain in 1493 with news of his discoveries, it sent shockwaves across Europe, especially in neighboring Portugal. King John II of Portugal was not pleased. He argued that these new lands, based on previous agreements and papal bulls, should belong to Portugal. Tensions flared. Both kingdoms had powerful navies, and the threat of war over these new territories was very, very real. An armed conflict between the two leading naval powers would have been disastrous for both, and for Christian Europe. So, what do you do when two powerful Catholic monarchies are on the brink of war? You call in the referee, of course. And in the 15th century, the ultimate referee was the Pope. At the time, the Pope was Alexander VI, who happened to be Spanish-born. Spain appealed to him, and in 1493, he issued a series of papal bulls, most famously one called Inter Caetera. This bull drew a longitudinal line from the North Pole to the South Pole, 100 leagues west of the Azores and Cape Verde Islands. All lands to the west of this line, discovered or to be discovered, would belong to Spain. All lands to the east would belong to Portugal. This was, to put it mildly, incredibly favorable to Spain, giving them claim to almost all of the newly found lands. King John II of Portugal was understandably furious. He felt cheated. The line was too far east, giving Portugal's African territories and routes plenty of room, but essentially handing the entire New World to Spain. He rejected the Pope's decision and entered into direct negotiations with the Spanish monarchs, Isabella and Ferdinand. This is a crucial point. The Treaty of Tordesillas was not just a papal decree, but a direct diplomatic agreement between two nations trying to avoid a costly war. After months of intense back-and-forth negotiations, they finally reached a compromise. On June 7, 1494, representatives from Spain and Portugal met in the Spanish town of Tordesillas and signed the treaty that would bear its name. The core of the agreement was simple. They agreed to move the line. Instead of 100 leagues west of the Cape Verde Islands, the new line of demarcation would be 370 leagues west of those islands. This might sound like a minor technical adjustment, but it had monumental consequences. By pushing the line further west, the treaty inadvertently granted Portugal a significant chunk of South America that hadn't even been officially discovered by Europeans yet. This is the eastern tip of modern-day Brazil. Did the Portuguese already know there was land there? It's a topic of hot debate among historians. Some believe Portuguese sailors had secretly landed there before 1500, and that King John II was cleverly negotiating for a territory he already knew existed. Others think it was just a lucky break, a result of wanting a larger buffer zone in the Atlantic for their African voyages. Either way, in 1500, when Portuguese explorer Pedro Álvares Cabral was leading a fleet to India, he swung far out into the Atlantic, either to catch favorable winds or by accident, depending on who you ask, and officially discovered Brazil. Thanks to the line drawn at Tordesillas 6 years earlier, he could legally claim it for Portugal. This is the fundamental reason why Brazil is the only Portuguese-speaking country in a continent of Spanish-speaking nations. It's a direct legacy of this 500-year-old treaty. Now you might be thinking, this all sounds a bit arrogant. Spain and Portugal just deciding to divide the entire non-Christian world between themselves? What about the millions of indigenous people who already lived in these lands? What about other European powers like England, France, and the Netherlands? And you'd be absolutely right. The treaty was based on the doctrine of terra nullius, or nobody's land, which conveniently ignored the complex societies and civilizations that had thrived in the Americas, Africa, and Asia for centuries. From the perspective of the indigenous peoples, this was an invasion, not a discovery. The treaty sanctioned and legitimized the colonial projects of Spain and Portugal, leading to conquest, exploitation, and the catastrophic decline of native populations due to disease, violence, and enslavement. It's an essential and tragic part of this story. Other European powers were also, to put it mildly, unimpressed. The French king Francis I famously quipped, "I should like to see the clause in Adam's will that excludes me from a share of the world." England, France, and the Netherlands simply ignored the treaty. They saw it as a private deal between Spain and Portugal, backed by a pope they increasingly had little respect for, especially after the Protestant Reformation. They sent their own explorers, privateers, and colonists to stake their own claims, leading to centuries of colonial conflict around the globe. So if it was ignored by so many, did the treaty even matter? Yes, absolutely. For about a century, it was incredibly effective at preventing all-out war between the two main colonial powers, Spain and Portugal. It allowed them to focus their resources on colonization and exploitation rather than on fighting each other in Europe. It defined their respective spheres of influence, with Spain focusing on the Americas, except Brazil, and the Philippines, and Portugal focusing on Africa, Asia, and Brazil. Speaking of the other side of the world, there was a problem the treaty's creators hadn't really thought about. They drew a line in the Atlantic, but the world is a sphere. Where did the line continue on the other side of the globe? This became a huge issue when both Spanish and Portuguese explorers reached the Spice Islands, the modern-day Moluccas in Indonesia. Both nations claimed the islands were on their side of the line. This led to another treaty, the Treaty of Zaragoza, in 1529. This time they drew a second line of demarcation in the east. Spain, in desperate need of cash, agreed to sell its claim to the Spice Islands to Portugal for a large sum of gold, even though modern geography shows the islands were technically in the Portuguese hemisphere anyway. However, this treaty did allow Spain to keep the Philippines, which was technically in Portuguese territory, but had been colonized by Spain. It was a pragmatic solution to a complex geopolitical and geographical puzzle. The Treaty of Tordesillas and its influence began to wane as the power of Spain and Portugal declined and other colonial empires rose. By the 18th century, it was largely a historical footnote, but its legacy is embedded in the very fabric of our world. It explains linguistic and cultural maps, not just in South America, but across the globe. It represents a pivotal moment in the birth of globalization, a time when the world became interconnected through trade, conflict, and colonization on an unprecedented scale. It's a story that reminds us how a single line on a map, drawn in a small Spanish town over 500 years ago, could have such profound and lasting consequences, shaping nations, cultures, and the course of history itself. The world we live in today was, in many ways, drawn up by the decisions made at Tordesillas. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this journey back in time interesting, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the history that shaped our world. Let me know in the comments what you think. Was it a brilliant piece of diplomacy or an outrageous act of hubris? See you in the next video.